Hello and welcome. This is the second episode of Comic Relief. I'm your host, Ed, and we're going to be exploring a specific character in this episode, one of my favorite characters of all time in comics, and specifically DC as well, and that's John Constantine. I can't tell you enough how much I think that John Constantine is underrated in comics. The great thing, though, is that because of Matt Ryan's portrayal as Constantine in the Legends of Tomorrow show, along with Green Arrow and obviously the Constantine show from a few years ago, he's brought a lot more notoriety to the character, which I think is great. But what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be exploring various aspects and versions of the character all the way back from its beginnings to give you an idea, if you're interested in the character, what are some of the important storylines you should read, and just some things about the character that might pique your interest. So we got to start at the beginning. The character actually, funny enough, came out in 1984, June, which the reason I think that's funny is because that was just a few months before I was born, which is kind of interesting in that fact. He was created mainly by Alan Moore, but there are several other artists and creators that kind of go with that kind of help to flesh out the character as well. The kind of funny thing about John Constantine was that for Alan Moore, when he was creating the character that first appeared in the Saga of Swamp Thing, issue 25, is he based the character off of Sting, which, the musician from Police. And he just kind of had this image of this, kind of like rough Londoner, blonde hair, trench coat. And the funny thing is that a few years after 1984, maybe late 80s, Alan Moore said he was in a pub and he saw this guy that was like the spitting image of Constantine, that he basically joked that he met his own character in real life. So it's really interesting. Now, as much as Alan Moore created the character, there are several other artists that really had a stake in creating the character and making their own. Steve Bissett's one of them, John Tolben, and John Ridgway. But the one that I definitely connect to the most and enjoy the most is Jamie Delano. And Jamie Delano is the writer of the first Hellblazer series that started in for some reason I want to say 88. I might be wrong on that. But late 80s, and I read the first couple volumes and absolutely love the series. If you are a fan of horror as a genre, it's great in that sense. This is Vertigo at its finest, at its early stages, back when Sandman was still being the first publishings of Sandman. Constantine was also in Lucifer as well, so he kind of crossed different issues when it came to that as well in the Vertigo imprint. And then eventually down the line, as Vertigo kind of dissolved, eventually John Constantine would kind of come back to DC specifically, and that's where he's currently at in the Hellblazer series. It's kind of been around since 2013, but they canceled the first series, Constantine, in 2015, and then the Hellblazer series actually started in 2015, and it's currently going on right now. So yeah, it's kind of interesting. They have several series, but the main one that I'll reference a lot is the Hellblazer series from 1988 to 2013, and that's the longest run for any of the Constantine comics. And Jamie Delano was pretty instrumental in the very first couple volumes. I think he might have wrote up until the mid 90s or so. So he had a long tenure on the comic. Kind of interesting in that sense. But as far as characterization goes, what I like about the character is he is a humanist. In many ways, he's a humanitarian, but he's also cynical. Constantine is not your typical comic book character. In fact, I rarely ever, use the word hero, because he's not. He's really not a superhero. He's a comic book character. He's an anti-hero. by most means. But he would certainly never call himself a hero. He's a screw up many times, and oftentimes he gets in situations where he pretty much gets out on the skin of his teeth. So the thing about Constantine was I was always drawn to him because I love magic users, mages, sorcerers, Doctor Strange being one of my favorite characters, Elminster. It's pretty, easy to kind of see that as far as sorcery goes, why I like the character. But I also like that aspect of the kind of detective that he was. I grew up loving characters like Kolchak the Night Stalker, Sherlock Holmes. And so for me, he kind of had a little bit of both of that. And that's what I liked about the character. I also love that as powerful as he could be, he also was very specific on how he used magic. For him, if he could get by on a cheap trick or a sleight of hand or a trick in some way, he would do it. And I always found that really interesting about the character, that he was in that kind of mindset, and Delano did a really good job of showing that. He just wasn't like a Doctor Strange kind of sorcerer where, he was attached to magic in this way. He learned a lot of his magic through, his own arts and tricks and things of that nature, and eventually, started getting attached with the afterlife and angels and different realms, and then, things got crazy after that, and summoning demons and all that stuff. So, but, as far as like who he is, he's very on the same, grain of a character like Batman. Ultimately, he's immortal with these powers that he's developed over time by the use of studying, knowledge, and a lot of alcohol. And that's the thing too. This is not like your standard character in the sense, because it's a lot more mature. Vertigo, if a little bit of history, if you weren't familiar with that, Vertigo started as an imprint through DC. They wanted to create a more mature line of comics. So in the late 80s, Vertigo was developed. One of the flagship comics of the time was Sandman, along with then Lucifer, and Constantine was another one. And then eventually you had Swamp Thing and other characters coming out, Etrigan the Demon, all part of like the Vertigo staple. So I found as I was reading a lot of the older Vertigo comics, I saw them in a very different light. I loved them, and for those that have heard my review of the Jughead series that I currently did, Archie Madhouse, what I love about Archie's Madhouse is it has a lot of the reasons why I like the older volumes of Hellblazer is because the Jughead series reminds me of that, and a lot of the newer Chilling Adventures in Sorcery and the Sabrina the Teenage Witch, Archie's Madhouse comics are also in that same vein, which I really like. There's graphic scenes in some of those older Constantine comics, but again, like if you're a fan of anything horror, this is definitely for you. The character itself is also universal because he translates well into various mediums. There's Justice League Dark, there is the Arrowverse, so you see the character in a variety of ways, so you can enjoy it whether it be on sort of the darker, more cynical sense of the older Hellblazer comics, or if you're looking at the more general things like the cinematic Arrowverse and things like that. So I think he's a character you should definitely check out and learn more. So if you want to kind of get started in learning more about the character, I would definitely start with the Hellblazer series. If you think you're gonna like the character and you want to kind of see it at its finest, definitely pick up Volume 1 of Hellblazer in 1988. Volume 1, it's a fantastic read. It's long. It's got over 280 pages. It's like a good 14 issues in the first volume, and then it goes from there. And I definitely recommend reading the first couple, and you'll definitely enjoy it. Also, the current Hellblazer, Constantine Hellblazer series from 2016 on is really good. It was part of the DC Rebirth series when they basically relaunched a lot of their lines. In 2016, and I'm a big fan of that particular series. I like what they've been doing so far. They've been doing a great job with it. It's current. And also, definitely check out Constantine from 2013. There was also a miniseries too in 2015, 2016. That one is okay. I do like that. But as far as like a more true to the character, I definitely recommend, like I said, that the Hellblazer specific story arcs. So that's pretty much it for this issue, this episode. So again, take a look at a lot of those different things, and also, you know, if you're a fan of the Arrowverse, you definitely need to check out some of Constantine's appearances. The show itself is, I think, definitely fantastic, and it's sad to see a show like that actually get canceled. I enjoyed it immensely. It definitely has its problems at times, but overall, I thought it was a good series. I'm talking about the one from the CW a few years ago with Matt Ryan. Eventually, he was able to reprise the character. He went on to play him in the Arrow episode of season 4, and eventually he played him also currently in a couple Legends Tomorrow episodes too in the 3rd season currently. So that's like pretty much happening right now, which is kind of cool too. And I imagine he's going to continue to come back into Legends and possibly other properties. And who knows down the line, maybe the more we see him, maybe CW will eventually relaunch the show. So that is it for this episode. Thank you for listening, and if you have any suggestions for upcoming episodes of Comic Relief, let me know. We'd love to hear from you.